Good morning, Meeting Room A. Thank you for being here. You are in the session for Kentucky State Cost Share and Ag Water Quality Plan Basics. My name's Lisa Manixma. I am your moderator. I will be passing out in just a moment these session feedback cards. Extremely important. Please fill them out. The folks at Oak really do take into account everything that you say about the sessions as they're building future educational opportunities for us. If you are here for continuing education credits, you can sign up for those at the registration desk. And I will introduce our speakers this morning. With us today we have Debbie Apple. Debbie has farmed for over 25 years with her children Braden and Raina. They raise milk, eggs, poultry, beef, honey, pork, lamb, and wool on their diversified farm in Rockfield, Kentucky. Reflecting on her farming journey, Debbie realized that she evolved from a livestock farmer to a grass farmer to a microbe farmer, tending to exponentially smaller and more populous organisms while caring for her land and animals. The River Cottage Farm direct markets their products through farmers markets and deliveries in Tennessee and Kentucky with deep dedication to its customers. And their website is rivercottagefarm.net. Native of Glasgow, Kentucky, Jay Nelson received his Bachelor of Science from the University of Kentucky in Environmental Science and a Master's from Western Kentucky University in Geoscience, specializing in karst studies. He worked at Mammoth Cave National Park and Kentucky's Department for Environmental Protection, later joining the Division of Conservation as Program Coordinator for the Green River Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. Since then, Jay has managed programs like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and the Kentucky State Cost Share Program, and he serves as the division's Ag Water Quality Plan Liaison. So, Debbie and Jay, thank you for being here, and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Again, my name's Jay Nelson, and hope y'all are having a good day so far. I'm going to be the boring government person of this little presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a couple of our conservation programs we have with the Division of Conservation and kind of give you a very brief outline of what they are, how they can help you on your organic operations. And after I go through those two things, Debbie's going to share some of her experiences with farm programs and describe her operation for you. And then at the end, we're going to kind of come together. And when we first started planning this presentation, you know, I was going to talk about my programs, Debbie was going to talk about her farm. And Debbie had a great idea about talking to you all about what a lot of people just call the farm office. When you go to the farm office, who are you talking to? What programs, who has what programs? It's very confusing. So at the end, I have some slides that I'm going to put up that's going to kind of help solve that mystery and, you know, the confusion that some people have when they go to the farm office, because it is confusing. And I'll be honest, I'll share a little story. When I came over to the Division of Conservation from DEP, Environmental Protection, I worked for a whole year before I understood those relationships. I had no idea who some of the people were I even worked with on a daily basis and what they did. So I know it can be very confusing. And I'm just going to tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of acronyms thrown out today. So I'm going to go over some of those and kind of share with you what those are. And we use acronyms, as you're going to see in this presentation. I'm going to try to avoid doing that during the presentation. But when you work for government, all these programs are a mouthful. They're like 4 or 5 words. So to write those in emails on a daily basis or talk about them, that's why we have so many acronyms in government. So the first program I want to mention is the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan. And I'm sure Debbie can attest. She has one of these. She's gone through this. How many in here have an Ag Water Quality Plan that you know that you have? Okay, about half. Okay, so an Ag Water Quality Plan, I look at this as a training tool. It's something to make farmers think about what they're doing on their operations. It's not like a funding source. You're not going to get any money from it directly as far as a subsidy program or something like that you might be familiar with. But I'll give you a little bit of history on the Ag Water Quality Plan before I describe it in detail. So back in the mid-1990s, the farming community came together. And in a lot of states, especially in the Midwest, farming was being looked at heavily by environmental protection. So farmers wanted to get kind of ahead of the game and not be regulated by EPA. So they started looking at different tools they could use so that they can kind of regulate themselves. So one of the results of that was the Ag Water Quality Act in Kentucky in 1994. So basically, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically there's a committee in the state, they called it the authority, and what they do is they come together, they meet, and they have a statewide plan, which means they have a whole list of different practices, what we call best management practices. You'll hear me say BMPs. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to use that because that's a mouthful. BMPs, agricultural BMPs. So they have a whole list of these things for the entire state. So what you'll do on your personal ag water quality plan is you'll basically go through this list of BMPs and kind of look at which ones are best for your operation, which ones kind of fit your operation, and things that you might be interested in, or you might not. You might not think they're practical on your farm, and that's perfectly fine. So that's kind of the outline of what an ag water quality plan is. So one other thing that you need to know is by regulation, every farming operation in Kentucky that has 10 or more acres is supposed to have an ag water quality plan. So you could actually be written in violation if you don't have one if you have 10 or more acres. Now, the outfit I work for, Division of Conservation, we're not regulatory. We're just here to help you with these programs. But for instance, if you got a complaint from Division of Water and they come visit you and you don't have one, they could hypothetically write you a violation. They probably are not. They're probably just going to tell you to get one done. But that is a regulation. Now, if you have less than 10 acres, you don't have to have one of these. However, some programs still require you to have one, like state cost share, for instance, the program I'm going to talk about in a minute. If you want to apply for state cost share, even if you have 2 acres, you still have to have an ag water quality plan. And even if you have less than 10 acres and you're not in any program, it's a good idea to have one of these things because, again, it's a tool to make people think about their resources. So, again, I pretty much gone over this slide already about the BMP, so I'm going to kind of filter through that. So, about 3 years ago, we came together with the Division of Water, and we wanted to make it easier to do these ag water quality plans. So, previously, there was an online version, but it was basically a PDF file. And you would go through pages and pages of different BMPs and try to figure out which ones might apply and which ones don't. So with everything today, we wanted to automate that, obviously, and make it a lot easier for people to do that. And this tool has really been successful in the 2 years it's been on the ground. How many of you have done this tool online? The ones that do have an ag water quality plan? Okay, just a couple of you. So we came together with Division of Water, and I'm going to do a disclaimer right now. So Division of Water, they are a regulatory agency. However, there's 2 parts to them. They have regulatory and they have their scientists. So first of all, we worked with the scientists on this part of it. So the regulatory people are not involved in this whatsoever. So don't be nervous if you think, well, if I do one of these and they don't have anything to do with it. After they helped, basically they funneled the money for this. I worked with one of their scientists to do this, and after we finished, they handed it over to us. So the Division of Water has no access to this database. So it's not regulatory, so you're not going to be tracked or anything like that. And even we in the division, we don't really track it. The only data we ever take out of this is if we have general inquiries like, okay, how many ag water quality plans are in Barron County? And we can say, okay, there's 200. That's all we do. We don't track individuals or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about any of that. But this tool made it a lot easier because you can see here, I'll just tell you the example. This is the final PDF that you'll have. So this would be your ag water quality plan that you could show to regulators or somebody that needs to see it. That's a summary of what you've done in that plan. And the good thing about having this online, there's 2 big reasons I think it's very, very handy to have this. One is it's a digital file. So you can keep this in your phone now. You don't have to keep up with a hard copy. If somebody comes out, hey, here it is. And the second thing is if you ever need to revise it, and if some of you said you participate in some of these programs, they have to be updated every so often. So now you can just go back and update it with a click of a button and you're good. You can just update it, print it off, and you're fine. That's a good question. So that depends on what program you're talking about and why you have it. So if it's not for a program, you have to keep it current with your farm. So if you're doing the same operation you've always done, you do it once and you're going to be good. If you're with CAPE, and I'm going to talk about all these programs in a minute. So CAPE is a county program. If you do it under CAPE, I think, Debbie, you probably done this more. I don't do CAPE, so it's not my program. It used to be every 3 to 5 years is the last I heard. With ours, everything has to be complicated in government, I know. So with ours, the authority that I told you about, they update this every 3 to 5 years. So what we say is it has to be updated with the current statewide plan. So if they haven't done it in 5 years, you're good for that 5 years. And we send out a notice to all of our conservation districts that tell them, hey, if somebody's applying for state cost share districts, they have to have an updated plan. So we'll communicate that with everybody. Good question. And by the way, I didn't mention this at first. I'm very informal. If y'all have a question, just raise your hand and let me know. I'm sorry, I forgot you told me that. Are we good? Do we need to repeat that?
If you have a question, let me bring you the microphone before you start speaking, please.
You want to take it back there?
So how do you access the online water quality?
We have a link for this. It's in our Kentucky Division of Conservation website, and there's a booth right before you go out the door on the right. As you go out, we have literature there, and everything has the link on there to access this plan. And that's a good segue into this slide. Good question. So I did this user guide last year, and this is on our Kentucky Division of Conservation website as well. So this user guide will walk you through step by step how to do an ag water quality plan. It has every screen on there, every question. It has screenshots of everything. And it's really, once you get into it, a pretty simple process. So, and this is kind of a screenshot. I know you can't read this in detail, but this is kind of how it's going to look when you go into the first page. That left page is the first page. It has all of your personal contact information. It has a really cool feature, a mapping feature, to get the coordinates, the GPS coordinates of your farm. You can go right in and find your farm and have a map of it right there with imagery. On the right, again, I know you can't read that, but if you see at the top of this first page, there's kind of a dark bar up there. There's 3 sections that you start out with. And as I mentioned before, this makes this process a lot easier to navigate. On the right-hand side, I have a couple of check boxes at the bottom, and you see there's more sections at the top. So what it's doing is, as you go through these pages of this ag water quality plan, it's going to ask you, okay, do you have livestock? And you check yes, it's going to add a section at the top, and you're only going to see questions for livestock. Do you have cropland? If you check the yes, then you're going to see both sections if you have both. So unlike the old forms where you had to go through all the different BMPs for all the sections, now it just prompts you which sections to go to, and that's all you have to deal with. You don't have to navigate through the entire form. And I'm going to jump back a slide after this, but this is a description of each BMP. So if you see a BMP on there and you're not sure what it means, every one of these has a descriptive form like this on there. It's a PDF file. You can print it off if you'd like. Again, at our display out there near the door, I have a folder that has all of these in there that you can kind of browse through and look at. But it tells you what it is, it gives you a description, it gives you funding options at the bottom, and it also gives you the environmental benefit. Now I'm going to go back a slide because if you look on the upper right, you see kind of blue text as a hyperlink. So when you're navigating this form, you click that hyperlink and it'll open up that PDF and you can read about what that practice is. Another thing, and again, I apologize for the you not being able to read this, but there's 3 boxes next to each one of these practices. So what you're going to do is you're going to check one of those 3 boxes for each practice that it asks you about. And those boxes are not interested or not applicable to my operation. So you're just kind of thinking, okay, I'm not going to do that. You have a box that says you have implemented, so you've already done it. And then there's a box that says you plan to implement it. So that might be a good idea to do in the future, but you haven't done it yet. And again, this is not an enforceable document. The only thing that you have to do is have one if you have that 10 acres or more. anything that you put in here, like if you put you plan to implement a practice and somebody comes out and says, well, you haven't done that, well, that has nothing to do with anything. It's not enforceable whatsoever. So just wanted to make that clear to everybody before. Oh. And that is it on ag water quality plans. Anybody have any questions before we go to the next little program that we have? All right. So my next program is actually a funding program. It's called Kentucky State Cost Share. And what this is it's a reimbursement program. We have numerous BMPs, those best management conservation practices, that we put on the ground, and we reimburse the person, the applicant, for the expense to putting those on the ground. Now, state cost share is reimbursable at 75% of actual cost. So if you put a practice on the ground and it costs $10,000, you're going to get reimbursed $7,500 of that. So our main objective is to get as many of these on the ground as we can across the state. And we have different funding amounts different years. When I first started with this program, we were getting $12 million a year to do BMPs across the state. Today, we're down to $2.5 million a year. So our budget has really been cut. Now, when we say $2.5 million, that's what we're appropriated every year. Of course, we have some lag money, we call it, when people kind of cancel the years before, or we are sitting on money that was never spent. We sometimes will give out a little bit more than that $2.5 million because of that money that's kind of recycled, but that's what we're appropriated every year is $2.5 million. And it is a competitive pool of applications statewide, which means when you apply for this, you're competing with everybody else in the state. There's no set aside for certain counties or certain types of agriculture. You're competing with everyone across the state. Now, one thing I want to make clear on this slide, I kind of already described most of this, is that the program is administered. Now, I'm with the Division of Conservation. So this is our program. We manage this program. However, locally on the front lines, it's worked through your local conservation district. That's your point of contact in your county. And again, I'm going to go through all these agencies here in just a minute if you're not familiar with those. But that's who you'll talk to initially when you go into the farm office and ask about state cost share. And those applications I mentioned earlier, they're scored on a statewide basis. We have certain, the way that we score these, it's really simple. We wanted to be very transparent about this, is we score these based on the type of practices that you're doing. We basically assess the score, and this is based in regulation. Our regulation says certain practices have certain priorities. So it all depends on what kind of practice you're putting on the ground. In Kentucky, our authority decided that animal waste practices were probably a little more important than some other practices, so those type of practices get more points than other types. So that's how it's scored, basically. So when you look at state cost share, first of all, on our website, again, if you go to the state cost share section on the Division of Conservation website, you will see a handbook that outlines all the practices that we have. And we probably have over 100 practices in total that we could put on the ground. We tried to have the same language in there as we had in the ag water quality plans. Now, one note here, they're not mutually exclusive, or they are mutually exclusive. In other words, you don't have to have the same practices in the ag water quality plan that you apply for in state cost share. They're not dependent upon each other, so you don't have to worry about that. We have 4 main categories of practices that we can apply to farms. We have your forest land, cropland, and you'll see we have 2 livestock practice categories. And the reason we have the 2 different livestock categories basically boils down to animal density. As you all know, there's a certain carrying capacity that the land has for animals. When you exceed that carrying capacity, you have a lot different type of operation if you have a true pasture land setting. So you get into animal feeding operation if you're above, basically, it works out to be about 1 adult cow, 1.5 acres per 1 adult cow is what that threshold is typically at. So yes, you have a question?
When you say livestock, do you only mean cattle or
No.
poultry, rabbits, whatever?
Everything. We have conversion tables that we can use. We convert that to animal units is what it's called, and that way we can calculate what's needed. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of our practices are more geared toward livestock type things, but we can apply these to any kind of animals out there. So yes. No, no. Now, it gets a little complicated because of course the animal units are different for different animals. So, but it doesn't have any effect on the score. So there are different practices under all of these different categories. You can only apply for one category per year. So if you have a farm that has livestock and cropland, you're going to have to pick one of the two and maybe apply for the other one the next year. But for instance, under livestock animal feeding operation, there's probably close to 80 practices under that one category. Forest land, there's probably only about 20. So it does vary, and it does repeat under some of them. Some of the practices appear in multiple categories, but they are somewhat different as well. So here we have, this is an example of some of the practices that we have, and this is a priority list. So what this is showing is, okay, these high priority practices are probably going to score better, or they will score better than the lower priority practices. So of course, we have to be careful. We want to be transparent. We can't give out the scores because you know how that goes. People are going to figure out how to game the system and get approved every single year. But if you look at this sheet, you'll probably know, okay, well, if I'm going to do a cross fence for rotational grazing, that's not going to score. That's still important, or it wouldn't be in the program, but it's probably not going to score as high as a fence to keep livestock out of a creek. So that's a good upsell as well. You realize if you want to practice in the lower priority section, you're going to have to do a practice that's a little bit better bang for the buck, I guess you could say, and kind of upgrade that application a little bit. So here are the types of situations that we're looking at trying to improve. Upper left-hand corner, that's a very common sight in Kentucky in the wintertime, an animal feeding area that looks really bad for an environment. The animals probably aren't enjoying that too well and not exactly healthy if they're standing in that all winter long. So we offer practices, the upper right-hand corner, the lower left-hand corner. These are both animal feeding pads for winter feeding of animals. These are for pasture land settings, so you can see they're not really, really big. The one on the lower left can support a herd up to about 30 cows. The one on the right is smaller, but we can do several of these. That's called a fence line feeder. That's very popular because they're installed on fence lines along a road, so you don't have to get out in the field to take your hay there. And of course, the one in the upper right, that's brand new. So what these are designed to do is they're designed to be heavy use areas, a gathering spot for the animals. They come in and eat, and they're designed for a rotational grazing system. So those animals should come in, eat, and then leave after a certain amount of time. They shouldn't stay there like all winter, or you're going to end up with same situation as you see in the upper left-hand corner. Then what you do is you can scrape those pads, and you can accumulate that manure, and in the spring, bottom right, you have your organic fertilizer. You spread it out in your fields. The bottom left down here, that's actually in Simpson County, and that's actually about 3 years old. This person, and it looks brand new, and I admit this was for a field day, so he had it nice and clean, but he runs a really tight operation, and he keeps all his stuff really clean, and that's his fertilizer spreader as well down there. You can't see it really in this picture, but in front of that tractor there's a big tarp. We were actually calibrating that spreader that day to see how the rate of spread that he had on there. And there's a few other practices. On the left, you have some of your cropland practices. You have cover crops. Grassed waterways can be either in pasture or in cropland. And then on the right, you can see these are simple practices, but these are some of the high scoring practices. You have on the bottom right, see upper right, you see the cows in a creek. Of course, you know that's not a good thing to be in the creek all the time for the contamination. You see these severely eroded stream banks in the upper right. Bottom right, we have fencing. The cows are fenced out of that creek. They can't access it. Now, one thing you might say, well, there's a cow in the creek down in the background. Well, if you see there's a lane, there's a fence across that creek, that's called a stream crossing, because we know that you have to sometimes move those cows from one pasture to another. So a stream crossing is fenced, and it has a hard armored floor. So either gravel or concrete across that creek. So there's a stable place for them to cross, and it's designed to be gated, so you open it, let them across, and then close it. They don't stay there a long amount of time. So those are some of the practices that we offer. So that's it for this first part. Are there any questions so far?
Is that the same as the CAPE program or not? Or is this an
He asked if this was the same as CAPE, and no, it's just totally different from CAPE. State cost share, we have a deadline. It's continuous sign up. You can go in and sign up anytime, but we score them once a year, typically at the end of the year. The cutoff's in November.
How far can you go back on spending? Over and that's not, say, 2 years ago.
Oh, the question was, if you made an investment previously, how far back can you go? The answer to that is we really don't. We only can pay on practices that you apply for and approved, and then you install after you're approved. So if you've already done something, you can't get money on that going back.
So I had NRCS come out. We have a spring, and we need water for our animals.
Yes.
And so we looked at doing a ram pump, and they said, well, ma'am, you could cost share it with us, but to meet our qualifications, you'll have to build it so heavy duty that you could cover your cost to do it all yourself cheaper if you just do it on your own. So how rigid and industrial are the approved plans going to be? Is it going to end up where, yeah, you'll cover 75%, but it's so much more expensive than...
That's a good question.
Because I have an organic farm, so I'm not going to put
Right.
in posts and things.
That's a good question, and there's so many things running through my head I have further questions about what they told you. First of all, a couple of concrete, simple answers. We actually use NRCS specs on our practices. So whatever you're required to do with NRCS, you're going to have to be required to do in here as far as the specifications go. Now, some of our policies are a little different. NRCS, for instance, you have to have a resource concern before they'll even touch it. So you already have to have a problem with the state cost share. You don't have to have that already. You can come in if you anticipate something, that you're going to do something, you can go ahead and do that. However, and this leads to the confusion of this, and I'm going to get into this in just a second, but NRCS, on the most part, is our technical agency for state cost share as well, which means in most counties, when you do a state cost share contract, NRCS is still going to work that from a technical standpoint in that county. We have an agreement with them to do that. So as far as what you're required to do on that, it's going to be virtually the same. Now, how you get there might be a little different, but the actual building, the instructions, the blueprints, all that's going to be the same. As far as talking about the money part, I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to get into the difference in programs in just a minute, so let me kind of put that off, that thought, and I'll kind of go over that, and I'll revisit that in just a second, if that's okay.
You may have already said this, but is the $2.5 million split in any particular way among the 4 different programs?
No, it's straight competitive score. It doesn't, one year we could have all one type, one year, it just depends on the scoring. And it does, I will share this with you, and this might be a little bit too much information as far as how you're wrapping your head around this, but it does kind of move from year to year as far as what's approved, because our points stay the same for all the practices. And I'll give you a good example. 2 years ago, West Kentucky was shocked because something like, and I'm just going to use this for an example, I don't remember exactly what practice it was, like a cover crop, for instance. Let's say it has a score of 50. I'm just making this up. But let's say our cutoff is like 45 one year. So all the cover crops get approved one year. And let's say the following year, a lot more people applied for animal waste kind of practices in other parts of the state, and a lot more people applied in general. Well, that cutoff score might move up, and all of a sudden, all the cover crops don't get approved the next year. So you might go from having 40 out of 40 applications in one county approved one year, and the next year getting none. So sometimes it seems like it might be like that, but it's not. It's straight competitive across the state. So, okay, I don't see any more hands up. I'm going to let Debbie take over right now. She's going to tell you a little bit about her farming operation and some of the programs she's been involved with, and then we're going to kind of come back together for an open discussion at the end.
Awesome. Okay. Ooh, that's loud. So I have gotten a ton of money from all of these different. You'll see all the different acronyms I've gotten pretty much from every agency except Jay's. And this is why we thought that this was such a great session idea, because when we first talked, I was like, well, I'm sure I've gotten money from you. I've gotten money from everybody. And then as we started talking about it, it's like, well, you know what? Maybe I didn't. And we have a woman in our office, Penny, that I work with a lot. And he said, well, if you got money from Penny, you probably got money from us. And I said, well, I've gotten tons of money from Penny. Well, I got that money from her when she was wearing her 25% hat for NRCS. And you know, so it all is so confusing. And I think the more that you work with your local office, you can ask these questions that you hear, like, you know, how's the rating this year? Or, you know, just understanding what they're looking for. I actually had a bunch of questions for Jay that I was writing down. And, but I'll go ahead and start back. I farmed with my 2 children. We just borrowed land everywhere. We had our milk cows at one 10-acre farm, and we had our chickens at 45 minutes away at another one. And I homeschooled, and we threw the school books in the car and drove. And then on Saturdays we sold at the farmers market. And I did that for 3 years with my kids and lived to tell about it. And so finally in about 2009, I contacted the USDA because I had a good down payment for a farm and I couldn't buy a farm. No bank would touch a woman farming by herself full time, borrowing land. And so I contacted the USDA. I'd never contacted the government for anything before. And I just said, do you have a program for women farmers? And she said, you know what, we do. Tell me about yourself. So I explained what I had been doing. And she said, you're the perfect applicant for this. And so I got my farm through them. So that is, and we're gonna, do you wanna put this up while I talk about all of these so that we can kind of see? This is the Farm Service Agency. Usually when you go into your office, you're gonna walk in the door and there's like one arrow. You go this way for one thing and you go that way for everything else. So, so FSA is not even on here, right? They are, Farm Service Agency. So that's how I got my farm. It's a beautiful program. And there's a couple of different pots, which was one question I had for you, Jay. It's good to know, like, how many pots there are out. For the state agency, he said there's just one pot. For FSA, there's usually 2 or 3 pots. It's changing a little bit with women minority farmers. We're in one pot, beginning farmers, and I think everybody else. So you can go in and figure out, like, which pot should I be in, because sometimes we can fit into several pots and there's more money in one pot. So I got my FSA loan, and I don't know if anybody in here even wants to know about, like, the farm loan that you would get. Okay. It's a really great program. They pay for your appraisal. There's no down payment. It's amortized over 40 years. And it's a once a year payment, but I paid it every week. I actually have the biggest file that FSA has ever had because I make 52 payments a year because I worked at, I did the farmer's market and I paid my chunk from there. But then when I got my farm, and the other thing about that is that money has to be allocated from Congress. So, like, you apply, you cannot get anything at auction because you have to be approved, then you have to find the farm, and if you can rent it for a little while, it took 3 months for Congress to allocate my money. The other thing is it's assumable, which is really nice. They have to apply kind of the same way, but getting a farm loan through FSA is very different than going to a bank. You have to prove that you're a good farmer. I mean, I took every book, magazine that I'd ever been written up in, I took it in a box, and that's how I proved that I was a good farmer. Plus I had, farm plan and that kind of thing. But they were absolutely, undoubtedly, just as excited about me getting a farm as I was. They could not have been more helpful. And working with those women in the office, they were like, okay, well now you probably need fencing. So I got operational loans for, I got 1 year loans through them, and I got 2 of those. One I bought cattle with, and one I just used to keep my farm going for that first year. When I bought my farm, there was no grass there. I bought it in February, and in April I realized there's no grass here. So I had to feed hay for a whole year. So I've gotten grants through for forage and biomass. Who would that be through? These are EQIP. Yeah, this is EQIP, and I've gotten the prescribed grazing. That was another thing I wanted to mention, is that some agencies have programs that correct problems, and some have programs that pay you because you're doing a great job at something. And it's really good to know which ones do which. When I was in Indiana, I tried applying, and I kept getting turned down. And then I was sitting with the woman, and we were looking at an aerial view of my farm. And she said, oh, I see you've got a creek running through here. Do you allow your cows in there? And I said, no, we've got it fenced off, and we've got filter strips. She said, that's not going to look good. And this particular program was fixing things. So that's why I kept getting denied. The next year we sat down, we looked at an aerial photo, and there was a wet spot there. And she said, ooh, do your cows get to go in there? And I was like, oh yeah, even though they didn't. But I got funded that year. So, so knowing whether they're trying to fix something or reward you. And I've gotten a lot of money for both of those. I've gotten all my cross fencing. And for me, being a woman farmer, I got 90 to 100% cost share. I got water. I got 1,500 feet of water, and put spigots every 350 feet, because we were going to do pastured poultry also. Then another EQIP program, I got a high tunnel. That was 2013. And throughout this whole time, I was getting prescribed grazing money. And that was money for doing a good practice. So every year I had to take in my grazing plan and show where I was moving my animals to. And I got, at that time I was getting like $900 a year for just what I was already doing. I got a bump up later on when I realized that another best practice management was moving my minerals, which I obviously did when I moved my cows, so I got another, I don't know, $300 or $400 a year for doing that. I've planted, I got money for, because I also do honey, we're extremely diversified. And so I was able to plant 1.5 acres of pollinator plants. I got that money. Who would that be through? Because state does that also, right? They don't do that anymore?
State cost share, we really don't have any funding for that specifically. Now, you can get peripherally from planting other things in other practices that help that.
Okay.
That specifically, so.
Okay.
EQIP does have some of that.
Right. So knowing who pays for what and why is the most important thing. Right now, I'm in a program called CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program. Again, that, they have all of their best management practices, and you go down the list and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm doing that. Like I've got wildlife, and you get a payment for each practice. Now my payment bumped up from $900 and then $1,300, and my last payment I got was for $3,500 because I looked at the list and I was like saying, well, I already do this and I already do that. So it bumped up, and that makes a huge difference. They come out once a year and they make sure, because I get money for keeping my pastures above like 3.5 inches, I think it is. And they'll come out once a year and take a picture of that. And so that's a nice little check. One of the things that I wanted to mention about all of these different agencies is that in the last 2 years, they've lost over 100 years of experience. There has been a massive exodus and retirement of some really great farming minds. And so read your contract and really know what they're expecting of you. And if you don't want to do something like what you were talking about with your water, that's a huge problem with NRCS. My husband worked for NRCS for a long time. That's his biggest complaint. He won't even take NRCS money on certain things because of that. In Kentucky, they want your posts too close together, and it's really important to contact like as high up in NRCS as you can to say, this is a crazy practice. Why are they making me do this? Because they do review that a lot. And they realize what happened over the last couple of years. And so it's important, and you don't have to do what's in your contract. You won't get paid for it, but you don't have to do it. So if you're organic and they say, well, your soil sample came back, where you need this, you got to put on some triple phosphate or whatever. You don't have to do that. Some of the younger people don't really know that in there, and they'll tell you, like, yes, you have to do it, but you don't. You just won't get that, like, $67 payment or whatever it is for that. But do you want to start, we'll kind of, yeah, here we go. This is perfect. Okay. Microphone?
Okay, good now. Okay, good deal. So, okay, y'all saw my meme up here, so that's what some probably feel like when you go into an office. So I've already mentioned the acronyms part. So I hear a lot of people just talk about the farm office in the county. Some old timers, you still hear the SCS office. NRCS used to be called the Soil Conservation Service back in the day, so a lot of people still refer to that as the SCS office. But basically, there's going to be two primary offices typically in a Kentucky county. You're going to have your USDA, which is NRCS and FSA office, and very often the Conservation District is going to be in that same office building, working with NRCS. So typically you're going to have 3 agencies in that one office. Now, in some counties, I don't know where all y'all are from in Kentucky, but some counties where USDA no longer has an office, the Conservation District will have a standalone office. There are a very few counties in Kentucky that the Conservation District just didn't want to be in an office with another agency, and they have their own office there as well. So you might have 3 offices in your county, but typically there's going to be 2. You're going to have the USDA office with NRCS, FSA, and the Conservation District, and then you're going to have your UK Ag Extension office. So those are the primary offices that you're going to see in any county. And again, here's this, I had this up before. So federal is NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Farm Services Agency. So when I kind of think about FSA, Farm Services Agency, I kind of think of them like the money/numbers people. They do the loans, they do the statistics on farms, they do that type of thing. NRCS is more of a programmatic, get on the ground. They're the ones that's going to come out and work the contracts on your property. And then you go to the state, and you have UK Extension, of course, they're a university. So they're one state agency. A little bit different than we're an executive branch, they're a university. And then we have the bottom two, which I'm with the bottom one, the Kentucky Division of Conservation, and you have the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Now, the bottom two, Conservation and Ag, they're typically not going to have an office in every county. For instance, in Division of Conservation, we have 8 employees statewide in offices. So we have regionally people. I work out of the Bowling Green office. We have other environmental scientists that work out of some other offices in the state. And then you're going to have your county conservation district. So that delineation, just explaining who is what, is kind of important here. Here's the visuals on that. So when we get to programs, of course I'm not listing all the programs, but kind of the ones that we're most familiar with these agencies. So NRCS has EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. So that is the big cost share type program with NRCS. That's where our specifications come from in state cost share as well. And really the two programs are very similar, state cost share and EQIP. Really do the exact same thing. It's just one's federal, one's state. EQIP tends to pay a little better than state cost share because they actually pay off a cost list. And a lot of times that is 100% paid for. That's why your question earlier kind of confuses me a little bit, because if they were they talking about EQIP or state cost share, do you know?
No, I'm the guy with bugged out eyes when I walk in.
Okay.
I'm like, I get a phone call, and I'm like, come in with your taxes, and I walk in, and I'm like, who wants me where?
Right.
Yeah.
And they shuffle me from office to
Right.
office, and I have no idea why.
Well, if they were talking about state cost share, it might make a little sense what they told you, because the money, we're 75% of actual, but EQIP pays off a cost list. So if they routed you through EQIP, you could potentially get 100% of that paid for.
Well, they actually just called me recently and said, is there anything else you want? I'm like, well, tell me what I can get. You know,
Right.
like, I need everything. It's a brand new farm. We've got to get all of our.
The one thing that I want to emphasize upon all of y'all is to ask questions. Don't be shy to ask them. Who
Right.
are you? Who do you work for? What program are we talking about? Educate yourself with them, because as you all know, we're all different. We all have different personalities. We all communicate differently. And, you know, when you go into an office sometimes, and I have the whole state. I work all the county conservation districts with NRCS across the state. And there's different personalities in every office. And some people just don't like to talk very much or don't want to do very much. I'll be bluntly honest with you. So press them and ask them questions if they're not answering your questions. Make them tell you. And you can always contact me and I can tell you. Now, I always tell people, and I told Debbie this before, I'm the kind of person, I don't like to put you all off or anybody off on somebody else. I don't want to say, hey, you need to call so-and-so. If I can answer a question or get the answer, I'll attempt to help you. Now, sometimes I can't answer. Like, I can't answer questions on EQIP, for instance. I can describe it and tell you about it, but if you had a technical question about it, I have to defer you to them because I can't answer for their program. But you need to make them answer your questions. That's one thing. If y'all take anything from this today, I want you to take that. Now, FSA does have one conservation program. It's called CRP. That's a land set-aside program.
And it's over now, right?
Yeah, they have one of them is continuous, but one of them is only
Yeah.
every so often.
I'd like to say something about the CREP also. One of the new programs that's it was like a 1-year pilot. We're really, really hoping to see that it worked well. So we have 300 acres in CREP, and it's been set aside. This is the 15th year. So it was set in for 15 years, and you don't use it. You have to really know that program. You can only mow a third of it every year. And so it's very specific. You can't graze it. You can't do anything on it. That's a $37,000 a year payment that we get for that. So ultra helpful. And it's going to end. But this new program that they're looking at is if you can find a young farmer that you will rent that land to for zero, for nothing for 3 years, you can continue to get that money. And we are seriously looking for kids to put goats on that land, because we would love to continue to get that $37,000 for the next 3 years. It's a fantastic program. Yeah, so if you either have land coming out of CREP or you need more land, it's really good. And ask questions like, if somebody says, well, this is how much it's going to cost, and yes, it's overkill, you can ask, who can pay for this? You know, if you can't, who can? And they all work in the same office. They will tell you, go ahead and try for EQIP. Something else we got from EQIP is, just to kind of let you know, we got a huge barn. And it was hay storage, but in the summer when we had no hay, we did farm-to-table dinners in there. So we built a beautiful barn, holds our hay in the winter, and we were able to still use it. And we got half of that. That's a 50-50 cost share, and we got that too.
All right, so Division of Conservation, of course, we manage state cost share, we work with ag water quality plans, and then CAPE, County Agriculture Investment Program. You asked about CAPE earlier. So CAPE is through Ag, Department of Agriculture. So in CAPE, the way I keep those separate from state cost share and CAPE is an ag production program, whereas state cost share is a conservation program. So anything in state cost share is going to have resource protection. Now, there are some practices in CAPE that will also kind of cover resource protection, but it's not necessarily for that. This is a production type investment for them.
And I've gotten buildings from CAPE, and I just got money from them. It's a 50-50 also, and I wanted to get a new bull. We have 150 cows, and so I was able to buy 2 really nice bulls, and just paid half price. So, and then I think I got some poultry equipment on that too. Yeah.
Can we back up one slide, maybe? Where you said something about you got a 50% cost share on a hay storage barn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
But you-
that
Yeah, was that through
I've gotten
EQIP?
I've gotten 2. I got through EQIP years and years and years ago, and then I got
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I'd
So does
say
that-
probably 15 or 16 years ago I got my first one.
Okay, but is that program,
I don't think so. I think
I was
it's
gonna
all
s-
switched over to CAPE for buildings, for anything for hay
okay,
storage.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then one last thing here, the County Conservation District, they administer state cost share at the local level. Some counties might have their own conservation programs. Counties that have plenty of money, like Warren County, for instance, we're down in Bowling Green, they have a pretty good budget down there, so they have their own conservation programs. Most of the counties are not going to have enough money to do their own, but some do have that. And then here's the real kicker, just a little bit more confusion for y'all before we leave about government. They may administer CAPE in your county, and they may not. Some counties, the Extension Service administers CAPE. Some counties, it's the district. So you might have to search around for CAPE, so it just depends. I'd say probably just guessing 70% of the counties, conservation districts administer CAPE. And then here's a quick rundown of quick rundown of the programs that I just mentioned. And any questions? We have a little less than 5 minutes, so any final questions before we get out of here?
Thank you. Great presentations, both.
Thank you.
My name is Avinash. Last name is Tope. I am a faculty at Kentucky State University. Just wanted to use this platform to showcase and to spread the word around that we have been funded by USDA's Agricultural Marketing Services for establishing satellite water testing, microbial water testing labs across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Can I use this for a couple of seconds?
Sure.
I found this topic very relevant to what we are doing.
Yes, sir. Go right
and
ahead.
we have a table right across yours. So I thought maybe this is a good
Yes.
way to spread the word around, because here are the minds that are interested in this aspect of farming. We have 3 labs that have already come up. One happens to be in Whitesburg, Kentucky. You may want to work with Valerie Hahn, if the name sounds familiar. Appalachian groundswell. One lab is in LaRue County Conservation District office. That's in Hodgenville, downtown. The 3rd lab is coming up in Bowling Green. And the 4th happens to be on my campus in my lab at Kentucky State University. This has been an effort that has fructified. We had a couple of years of research projects on what we would find with the microbial quality of water, and that's what the USDA liked when we applied for this grant. The idea is, it is difficult for farmers to get their samples of water tested, and it is a part of your safety plan anyways. So we have these labs. We will be, the big framework is stop by at these satellite labs. You will be given a pair of gloves, a water bottle for sampling, and information on how to collect it. And we will be more than happy to come over if you are interested to show you how it is done. Leave the water sample in the lab. There are certain days, and I have some flyers here. There are certain days for each lab, and Monday and Tuesday is Whitesburg. Wednesday and Thursdays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are for the Hodgenville lab, and I'm working on the details with the Bowling Green lab yet. So you get a report on your microbial water quality where we test the coliform and the exact E. coli count. And you get the test by the end of the week. So if you are bringing in the sample in Eastern Kentucky, Monday or Tuesday, if you happen to deposit your sample, you get your report on Thursday.
That reminds me of something too, that it's really important to know, like if you're getting money for seed, to plant seed, first of all, they'll have a date that you have to make sure that you seed before that, but also you need to keep your tags from your bags. You know, there's just little things like that that are just really important to know, and you've got to go ahead and photocopy those and send those in.
Thank you, Debbie. I have some flyers here if you are interested. Please stop by. I'm here, and we also have a table out there.
While you're walking back there, I have one question for you all. If we were able to send out kind of a cheat sheet on all this, would that help you all, you think? Okay. I'll get one of those drawn up, and I'll get it to Brooke and Jenny, and we'll get that sent out to everybody.
Can you go ahead and go to the next slide so I can get your contact information too?
Yep.
We have time for one more question. Also, reminder to please fill out your session feedback cards.
Okay. On the water samples, running water, still water, multiple samples.
Any water you are any water that you use for.
Hello out there, I'm sorry.
That's the central one.
Yeah.
Any water that you guys are using for irrigation.
I am so sorry to interrupt the most important conversation of your day, which is the one you're in the present moment. Just want to let you know that as this session time is wrapping up, Monet Proctor is in room A, leading the functional movement for farmers stretch break. So if you feel like you've been sitting down too much this morning, feel free to make your way to room A. She'll have 10 to 15 minutes of stretching for you, no experience necessary. That's in room A. And then we'll be moving into our general session. Keynote John Eckerd
I have served on
and
the Soil Conservation Board. I chaired my county ag development board.
This is where education was
I never
just straight to so here's what I do.
As you're getting up and deciding where to go next, feel free